Hi all, welcome in this third lectures on minimax lower bounds. Before I start the lecture, let me do a short recap of what we have seen the last time. I remind you that we have considered the Gaussian regression model. So we observe a y, which can be decomposed as x times beta star plus some noise. So I call f star the signal and epsilon the noise. In the Gaussian setting, so the noise is simply a Gaussian random variable with covariance sigma 2 times the identity. And in the sparse coordinate case, we consider the case where the vector beta star has only a few coordinates which have non-zero coefficients. What we have seen the last time in the model selection lectures is that if we consider the model selection estimator for any matrix capital X and any beta star in Rp, what we have is that the risk of the estimator is upper bounded by some constant times the number of non-zero coefficient in beta star times the logarithm of EP divided by the number of non-zero coefficient of beta star times sigma 2. So this is what we have proved the last time, and the natural question is, can we do anything better? And this is really the topic of today, is to try to give an answer to such a question, and for this we will use the most common technique, which is based on some inequality which are lifted from information theory. Let us describe first the statistical settings that we will consider. So we will have a collection Pf indexed by f of distribution on a measurable space Y with a sigma algebra A. The set F is endowed with a distance D, so we can look at the distance between pairs of parameters in F, and we define the risk which is associated to this distance. So if we take any estimator, so what is an estimator? This is a function which goes from y to f and which is measurable, and we define the risk as follows. So we look at the distance between f hat of y and f, we take it to the q, and we take the expectation under the distribution Pf. So EF here refers for the expectation under the probability distribution Pf. And Q is some non-negative number, positive number actually. So, as an example, you may think as F as being R to the N, Pf as being the Gaussian distribution with mean F and covariance sigma 2 identity, D the Euclidean distance, Q equal to 2, and then the risk will simply be the expectation under the distribution Pf of the square Euclidean norm between f hat of y and f. So usually when we consider estimators in statistics, we simply write f hat and not f hat of y, but here it will be important to emphasize this dependence. So this is why in all these lectures we will really write f hat of y for the estimators. So the question is, what is the best estimator f hat that we can use in order to estimate f? So first, if we consider this question for the first time, you say, okay, I want the estimator which has a smaller risk for the f that I am looking at. So what you want is the f hat which minimizes this risk here, which is expectation under the probability Pf of the distance to the q. But if you look at this quantity, well, it is very simple. So the best estimator has a risk which is 0. Why? Because it is rich for the estimator f hat of y, which is always equal to f. So this estimator is a very good estimator if you want to estimate f, but of course it is a very bad estimator if you want to estimate something else than f. So as you can see, trying to find the best estimator in order to estimate f makes no sense from a statistical point of view. And if you think a little bit of what you want actually is an estimator f hat which is good on all the class f. Not only for one f, but you want it to be good for all the f. As you don't know f, you want this to be good for all the f. So we can have a notion of risk which is related to this, and which is very popular in mathematical statistics and in theoretical machine learning, which is the minimask risk. So what is the minimask risk? We consider the best possible risk uniformly over the class F. So here you have the risk for a given F. You take the maximum over all the F, and you look at the estimator F hat such that this maximum risk is the largest. And since you have a mean here and you max here, this is what we call minimax risk. So what do we want to do in this lecture? In this lecture, what we want to do is to prove some lower bounds on this minimax risk. This is really our target. So you may wonder, well, why should I care about proving lower bound on this minimax risk? The reason is the following. Assume that you are able to prove that this minimax risk is smaller than something, some lower bound, and then you find some estimator, F hat, which has a risk which is close to the lower bound uniformly on F. Then it means that your estimator F hat will perform almost as well as the best estimator uniformly over the family F. So if you are able to find such an estimator, then it means that you cannot really improve much your estimation. But if you do not succeed to find such an estimator, or if your favorite estimator does not fulfill this kind of equality, it means that either the lower bound is not good enough, this can happen, or your estimator is not good enough, and you should try to find a better estimator. So this is why we care about proving lower bounds. So how we will prove this kind of lower bound? Well, we use a recipe which is quite simple. First, we will not take the maximum over the whole class, which is usually infinite and uncountable. We will only consider a maximum over a finite number of parameter, f1, fn. So we'll do some kind of discretization of the parameter space f. And then we will use lower bounds from information theory. So let's do it. So for proving lower bound, we will proceed into 3 steps. And the first step, which is really the main step, is to start from deriving a lemma from information theory, which is Fano's lemma. And for this lemma, we will need a quantity which is very classical, which is a Kullback-Leibler divergence. And probably I will do a short recap on the blackboard. But first, I remind you that we say that probability distribution Q dominates some probability distribution P if and only if it fulfills the following property, which is that if an event QA has a probability with respect to Q which is equal to 0, then it also has a probability with respect to A which is equal to 0. Right? So when you have a probability Q which dominates P, you know that then you can look at the density of P with respect to Q, and so you will be able to define the Kullback-Leibler divergence between P and Q, which is defined as the integral of the logarithm of this density of P with respect to Q that you will integrate with respect to P. So this is the Kullback-Leibler divergence, and we will use the fact that minus log is convex to check that this quantity is always non-negative. So, for example, we can write it as minus the logarithm of dq over dp times integrated in respect to P. And then this is convex, so you can apply Jensen inequality. And if you apply Jensen inequality, what you get is that minus the logarithm of the integral of dq over dp dp is larger than the Kullback-Leibler. Jensen is the other way around. Right? This is smaller than the Kullback-Leibler divergence. Right? Because this is convex. And now if you look at this quantity, this is simply equal to the integral of dq, which is equal to 1. So here we have something which is equal to 0. So we have proved that the Kullback-Leibler divergence is larger than 0. So this will be an important quantity that we will use for proving lower bounds. As an example, let us compute the Kullback-Leibler divergence between two Gaussian distributions. So here, Pf will be the Gaussian distribution with mean f and with covariance sigma 2 identity. So if you look at the Kullback-Leibler divergence, so what will be here the density of Pf with respect to Pj, it will be the ratio of the probability density function. So if you look at the ratio of the probability function, you will have the constant that will cancel out, and you will have the ratio of the exponential, and then we will integrate with respect to the law Pf. So, of course, logarithm of an exponential is just the identity. So here we have the difference of the square, and if you expand the square, you obtain that this quantity is equal here to this quantity that we integrate with respect to this distribution. Here we have something which is a constant, which does not depend on x. So if we integrate with respect to this distribution, we just have this constant. And here we have a second term. And in this second term, so we only have x here. And since the distribution is a Gaussian distribution which is centered in f, x minus f is a centered random variable, so expectation is equal to 0. So when we will integrate this quantity, we will obtain 0. So at the end, what we have proved is that the Kullback-Leibler divergence between two Gaussian distributions with mean f and j and covariance sigma 2 identity, it is given by the square norm of f minus j divided by 2 sigma 2. And I think that it should be useful that you take a pen and do this computation by yourself. Right. So now we are ready to state the main result, which is Fano's lemma, so which is a lemma which is lifted from information theory, but what we will see is a proof which is not the original proof from information theory, and which has a nice feature to be simple and that we can understand as a statistician. So what is this lemma? So we start from n distribution, P1, Pn, and another distribution Q, which dominate all the Pj. And then we look at the following quantity. So here we will take the average of the probability that a predictor g hat of y to be different than j. So you observe y, which has a distribution Pj, and you look at a predictor g hat, which from y will try to predict the value j, and you look at the probability that g hat make an error, so it does not predict well j. And then you take the average of all the j, and you look at the g hat, which is the best, for which this average risk is the best. And what Fano's lemma says is that this quantity is always larger than 1 minus 1 plus the average of the Kullback-Leibler divergence between Pj and Q divided by logarithm of n. So I just mentioned that we can slightly improve this lower bound by changing the 1 by a log 2. Does not make a big difference on the, you have to have a proof which is slightly more technical. So we'll keep this one here since it does not change anything, and just I'll let you know that you could have a log 2 if you want. Alright, so you have a bound here which is always true, and as you can see, this here does not depend on Q at all. Alright, so you can choose Q as you want, as long as Q dominates Pj. And the classical choice for Q is to take the average of the Pj, but you could choose something else if you want. So this is the main part of today's lecture, is to prove this lemma. And to start with, we'll observe that when we look at this quantity here, we can write it as another quantity. So we want to have a lower bound on this quantity, and proving lower bound is sometimes not that easy for us because we are used to prove upper bound. So we try to change this into something where we have to prove an upper bound. So if we look at this quantity, here we have the probability that G hat is different from J. So this probability is equal to 1 minus the probability that J hat is equal to J. And if you take the average of these quantities, you will have the average of 1, which is 1, minus the average of the probability that J hat is equal to J. And now, if you take the J hat, which minimizes this average, well, since you have a minus here, this is the same as taking here the maximum, the J hat, which maximizes this average. So if you want to get a lower bound on this quantity, all we need is to get an upper bound on this quantity. And it turns out that we can give an explicit formula for this quantity, and also an explicit formula for G hat, actually. So what is this explicit formula? This is this one. So when we look at this quantity here, it is exactly equal to 1 over n, the expectation with respect to Q, of the maximum of the probability of the density probability of Pj with respect to Q taken in Y. Alright, so Y here is distributed as Q, and you look at the density of Pj with respect to Q in Y. And if you think in terms of statistics, this is simply the likelihood of Y with respect to the likelihood, of the parameter J when we have the observation Y. So let us prove this formula. So the proof is quite simple. Right, I have all the proof here on my screen. So we start from this sum of probabilities, and what is this probability? So this is the integral on Y of the indicator function G hat of Y is equal to J, and we integrate with respect to dPj of Y. And of course, we can always write this integration with respect to dPj as the density of dPj with respect to Q times the integration with respect to Q. So this is what we do. We introduce this density of Pj with respect to Q. And here we just have an equality. And now we show first an inequality. So we start to prove that this quantity is smaller than this, and then we see that we have equality. So first, to prove the upper bound, what we do is to say, okay, so this quantity, this is always smaller than the maximum over all the k of the densities. Right? So if I plug this quantity and if I do an intervention of the integration on the finite sum, I obtain this formula here. And if I look in this formula, I see that here I don't have any j anymore. The only place where I have a j, it is here, in the indicator function. But what is the sum over j of the indicators at g hat is equal to j? This is exactly 1. Because g hat is taking one value j and only 1. So it is equal to 1. So this is equal to 1, and what we have is the integral with respect to y of this maximum dq of y. So this is the expectation of the maximum of the dpk over dq in capital Y. So capital Y here is distributed with respect to q. So what we have proved so far is that for any g hat, this quantity is smaller than this one. Now, as we will see, there is one g watt for which we have equality here. So what we need is to have an equality here. So when do I have an equality here? I have an equality here when g hat will correspond to the index j, such that the density corresponds to the maximum of the densities. And this is simply the maximum likelihood estimator for j. So if you take g hat as the maximum likelihood estimator, here you have an equality, here you have an equality. So at the end, we have proved that this is equal to this for the maximum likelihood estimator. So we have proved this formula here. So now that we have this formula, what we need is to upper bound this quantity. Since I remind you that, so this is the quantity that we want to lower bound. It is 1 minus this quantity. So this quantity, we have seen that it is equal to this one. So now we want to have an upper bound on this quantity in order to have a lower bound on this one. And for this, what we will do is to use an upper bound that we have seen in the first lectures. So I remind you that in the first lectures, what we have seen is that we should take n random variables, which are variables which takes value in some interval I of R. Then for any convex function, which is non-negative, you have that phi of the expectation of the maximum, which is smaller than the sum of the expectation. Right? So I remind you that this is something you have seen during the first lecture. So we will use this lemma in order to upper bound this quantity. So the Zj will be the density of Pj with respect to Q taken in Y, and we choose a suitable function phi. As a function phi, what we will choose is this one. We choose phi of u, which is u log u minus u plus 1, so which is defined for any non-negative u. For u equal to 0, we take the limit, which is 1. And okay, this function looks like this. So you can take, for example, the second derivative and see that it is negative. So phi is a convex function. All right? And I have said before, we take Zj equal to this quantity. So let us compute the expectation with respect to the probability Q of phi of the density. So I use the expression of phi. So this is the integral over y of the logarithm of the density times the density integrated with respect to Q minus the integral of the density with respect to Q plus 1. Let us look at this quantity. Here we observe, just as before, that this is only integration with respect to Pj. So this term is nothing but the Kullback-Leibler divergence between Pj and Q. Remind you, it is exactly the way the Kullback-Leibler divergence is defined here. If we look at the second term here, again, this is simply the integral over y of dpj. So this is equal to 1. So here you have minus 1 plus 1, so this will be 0. So at the end, what we have obtained is that this expectation is exactly equal to the Kullback-Leibler divergence between Pj and Q. So now we can apply the lemma from lecture 1 on this function phi. And what we obtain is that phi of the expectation of the maximum of the densities is upper bounded by the sum of the Kullback-Leibler divergence between Pj and Q. So now we want to invert this inequality in the sense that we want to have something on this expectation. So for simplicity in the computation, we call n times u this expectation here, right? So we have that phi of n times u is smaller than this sum, and we want at the end to have a bound on u. So let us look at phi of n times u. So I remind you what is the value of phi. So phi of u is u log u minus u plus 1. So if you plug in, you have nu log of nu, which is log n plus log u, minus nu plus 1. So we can rearrange the terms. So the first one here gives you nu log n. And then you have several terms with n as a factor. So R, we have nu log u, this term, minus nu, this is this term. And then what we do is that we add plus 1 here so that we have plus n. So we have to remove n minus 1 because here there's also plus 1, so minus n plus 1 gives you minus n minus 1. Here we recognize again phi of u. So this is something which is non-negative. So at the end, what we obtain is that phi of nu is always larger than nu log n minus n. Why? Because you can always upper bound n minus 1 by n. So now, if I replace nu by this definition, what I obtain from this inequality here and this one here is that log n times nu, so nu is this expectation, is smaller than, so I take the n here, I move it on the other side, so I have my n here, plus phi of nu, and phi of nu is smaller than this sum. So plus this sum here. So at the end, we have that this expectation is smaller than n plus this sum divided by logarithm of n. And actually the proof is finished. Why? So let's come back to the very beginning of the proof. What we have seen is that this quantity that we want to lower bound is equal to this one, and this one is equal to this quantity, right? So this is equal to 1 minus this quantity. This is what is written here. This quantity is smaller than y minus this quantity. And now I will use this upper bound here in order to have a lower bound. And if I use this upper bound, I end up with 1 minus 1 over log n, 1 plus the average of the Kullback-Leibler divergence. And this is exactly Fanno's lemma. So this is the main step in order to prove lower bound. This is to derive Fanno's inequality here. And now we'll be able to use this inequality in order to prove minimax lower bound. But before this, I think it's good time to have a coffee break. Fanno's lemma gives a lower bound on this quantity, and this quantity is not the minimax risk that we are considering, which is this one. So let's just try to see how we can move from Fanno's lemma to a lower bound on this quantity. So the second step will be to move from Fano's lemma to a lower bound over a finite set f1, fn of parameters. So let us consider any estimator f hat, so which is something which goes from y to f and which is measurable. And we define g hat of y, which is the index j, which minimizes the distance between f hat of y and fj. So this is simply the index such that fj is the closest to f hat of y. So if we look at the distance between fj and f of g hat of y, first what you observe is that if j hat is different from j, then this distance is always larger than the minimum of the distance between the fi and fk, of course. So we have this first inequality. And then what you can do is to apply the triangular inequality. So we will add here f hat. So here we just apply triangular inequality. And then we just remember what is the definition of j hat. So j hat is the j which is the closest to f hat. So fj is the closest to f hat. So here f of g hat is always closer to f hat than fj. So this distance here is always smaller than this one. So at the end, what we have obtained is that this is smaller than twice this distance. So what we have obtained is that this distance, so the distance between f hat and fj, for any j, this is larger than, so there is a 2, so you will have 1/2 the minimum of the distance, indicator g hat is different from j. So now let us take this inequality, put it to the Q, and take the expectation with respect to fj. So if we do this, what we will have, so the 1/2 will be 1/2q here. The minimum of the distance will be the minimum of a q to the q. And when we will take the expectation with respect to the probability p of aj of this quantity, we will simply have the probability that j hat is different from j. And then taking the average, we have the average, because we observe that this does not depend on j. So we have obtained that this average risk, so we are not looking at the maximum of the risk, but the average risk of any estimator f hat is larger than this quantity, and we can still lower bound this quantity by the minimum over all the possible j hat, which is this quantity. And now, of course, you have recognized the quantity which was showing up in Fano's lemma. So if we take Fano's lemma in order to lower bound this quantity, we end up with the following corollary of Fano's lemma. So this is the corollary 3.4 in the lecture notes. You have that for any family f1, fn included in F, any probability distribution Q which dominate all the P, F, and J, you have that the best f hat in terms of the average risk, so not the max risk, but the average risk over the fj, is lower bounded by this quantity. So we recognize here 1, 2 to the q minus the distance, the smallest distance to the q here, and this quantity is lower bounded here according to Fano's lemma. So here this is p indexed by f and this j. So at the end, we have something which is closer to the minimized risk. We have this lower bound, which tells you that if you look at the average risk over a family f1, fn, then you can always lower bound the best possible average risk over all the possible estimator by this quantity. So this is the second step, where we have moved from Fano's lemma, which lower bound this quantity, to a lower bound on this quantity, which is about average of risk. So now we just have to conclude, and this is the last step, by finding a good discretization. So if we take any f1 fn in F, then, so I remind you how is defined the minimax risk. So this is the minimum over all the possible estimator of the maximum over all f of the risk. Then it is lower bounded by the minimum and the maximum. So instead of looking at all the family F, we will only look at F1, Fn. So the maximum of the risk between F1 and Fn. And then we can lower bound the maximum by an average. So it will be lower bounded by the minimum over F hat of this average here. And this is exactly what we had in corollary 3.4. So if we apply corollary 3.4, we obtain that this quantity is larger than this one. So at the end, what we have obtained is a lower bound on the minimax risk. And this lower bound is valid for any choice of F1, Fn. But of course, for some choices, it will be something big, and for some other choices, it will be something small, can even be 0 or even negative. So all the art is to find a good discretization F1, Fn. So if we look at this lower bound, what will be a good discretization? So we want this quantity to be as large as possible. So if we want this to be large, we want that this minimum distance here is large. So this is the first point. We want to have the minimum distance between pairs of parameters to be as large as possible. The second point is that you need this to be, so this is always smaller than 1, but you want this to be not too small, at least you want it to be positive. So you want this to be smaller than 1, right? So this quantity must be smaller than 1. So the recipe is to find some parameter f1, fn, such that this quantity here is smaller than 1/2. So you could choose something else than 1/2, but if this is smaller than 1/2, this parenthesis here will be larger than 1/2. And at the same time, we try to have the difference between pairs of parameters as large as possible. So this is really the recipe for obtaining a good minimax lower bound. So we start from this inequality and then try to find some f1, fn such that this is smaller than 1/2 and this is as large as possible. So it turns out that in the following, so this is just for having nicer constant, we'll use a different version of Fano's inequality from this corollary, which is the following one. So there are many variants of Fano's lemma. Here we will use a variant which is called Birget's lemma. And this variant is somewhat more handy, so this is why we use it in the following. So this is essentially the same result. The difference is only that we have a cleaner constant. So this is a variant of corollary 3.4, which is corollary 3.6, which is the following. So for any f1, fn, which is included in F, we have that if we look at the Kullbaer-Leibler divergence between any pair P of Fj, P of Fk, if this maximum is smaller than twice E over twice E plus 1 times log n, then we have that the minimax risk here over the family f1 fn is always larger than 1 over 2 to the q 2e plus 1, the minimum of the distance to the q. Right? So again, in this case, what we need is to look at some f1 fn such that this condition star here holds, and we want to have f1 fn as much spread as possible so that this quantity is as large as possible. So the proof of this corollary is almost the same than the proof of corollary 3.4. It is based on Birget's lemma. So we'll start by recalling what is Birget's lemma. So if you move in the lecture notes towards the very end of the lecture notes in Appendix B, you will find this theorem B13, which is Birget's inequality. So what is Birget's inequality? It is the following. So you take a family of disjoint events and a collection of probability measures. Then you have this bound, which is always true, which is that the minimum of the probability of the event AI under the probability distribution Pi is always smaller than this constant maximum, the maximum of the Kuber-Leibler divergence between Pi and Pj divided by log n. So this is a variant of Fano's lemma, which is somewhat more general because this is true for any family of events, not event like G hat is equal to J. And the proof of this inequality is not harder than the proof of Fano's lemma. It is maybe even shorter, but I think that it is less natural. So that's why I've given a focus on Fano's lemma rather than this inequality, even if it is slightly more general. So you can have a look at the proof. As you can see, it is quite short. It is finished here. And the core of the proof is, again, Jensen inequality that is applied here with the log. So I will let you have a look at this. So let us come back to the proof of corollary 3.6. So we'll use the notation of Fano's lemma, and we will define the event Aj as being the event where G hat of y is equal to J. So of course, by definition, these events are disjoint because G hat takes one value, not several values at the same time. So if you take Birget's inequality, what you obtain is that the minimum of the probability of this event is always smaller than this constant maximum of the maximum of the Kullback-Leibler divergence between pairs of distribution divided by log n. So now, if the condition star here holds, so this maximum is smaller than the constant times log n, this is always smaller than the constant. All right? So this is a variant of Fano's lemma, from which we get that the quantity which appears in Fano's lemma is always larger than this constant when the condition stars hold. So I think it is a good exercise that you check why this inequality gives this inequality. You just have to look again at Fano's proof. So now once you have obtained this variant of Fano's lemma, you just follow exactly the same lines as in corollary 3.4 in order to get the proof of this bound. So in the following we will use this corollary. We could have worked with the other one, but I think it is slightly more handy and it provides better constants, so that's why I've decided to use this one. But before proceeding to the example that we were considering with the coordinate sparse regression, I think it will be good to have a break again. What we have seen so far is that the minimask risk is larger than this quantity here for any f1, fn which fulfills the condition star. So now what we want to do is to use this result in order to derive some minimax lower bound on coordinate sparse regression. So this is what we will do in the remaining of this lecture. So we consider coordinate sparse regression. So we will consider a signal f, which is of the form x times beta, where the number of non-zero the coefficient of beta is smaller than some integer capital D. And of course, capital D will be smaller than p, which is the dimension of beta. We consider the Gaussian distribution. So PF is the Gaussian distribution with mean F and covariance sigma 2 identity. And for the risk, so I remind you that in the last lecture, we're looking at the expectation of the square Euclidean norm. So as a distance, we'll take the distance induced by the Euclidean norm, and as a power, we take q equal to 2. So the risk will simply be the expectation of the distance to the square. I remind you that what we have seen at the beginning of the lecture is that the Kullback-Leibler divergence between two Gaussian distribution with mean f1 and f2 and covariance matrix sigma 2 identity is equal to the square distance between f1 and f2 divided by twice the square of the variance. So before stating a lower bound on the minimask risk for coordinate sparse regression, I need to introduce a restricted isometric constant. So let me fix some dimension d max, which is smaller than p to the 2. Then we will define the lower restricted isometric constant as the infimum of this ratio here for all the beta which have at most twice Dmax non-zero coefficient. And similarly, the upper restricted isometric constant will be the supremum of this ratio for all the beta which have at most twice Dmax non-zero coefficient. And then, with these quantities which are defined, we can state the result, which is that if we see any Dmax which is smaller than p over 5, then for any d which is smaller than Dmax, we have that the minimask risk, so this is the best possible risk uniformly over fd, where fd corresponds to all the possible linear problem with at most d non-zero variable which are active, then this minimask risk is always larger than this constant, this ratio of restricted isometric constants, times d log of p over 5d times sigma 2. So we'll first prove this result, and then we will discuss what it means with respect to what we have seen in the last lecture. So to prove this, well, this is exactly the recipe that we have seen before. What we will do is to choose f1, fn in fd, which are well spread and which fulfills the condition star. So I'll remind you what is a condition star. The condition star is this condition here. And we will apply this corollary in order to get a lower bound on the minimask risk. So let us implement this. So the case step is the following lemma, which says the following. So for any integer d, which is smaller than p over 5, we can prove, and actually you will prove it, that there exists n beta, so n vector beta 1, beta n, which have entries which are either 0 or 1, but only d of them are equal to 1, exactly d of them are equal to 1, such that if you look at the number of non-zero coefficient of the difference of beta j minus beta k, it is always larger than d for all j different than k. And the number of betas that I am able to find fulfilling this fulfills this inequality, so the logarithm of this number is larger than d over 2 log of p over 5b. So we are able to find a number of points, a number which is quite large, such that the entries are either 0, 1, 1, and only d of them are 1, and such that they are quite far away one from the others, in the sense that at least, d entries of beta j minus beta k are non-zero for j different from k. So the proof, this is an exercise. This is one of the assigned exercises. This is exercise 362. So this is something for you. So we take this result as granted. So of course, what we want to do is to build the f1, fn here from this beta 1, beta n. So we take x times beta j, and then we will add a scaling factor r, and the scaling factor, we will use it in order to have the condition star which holds. So I'll remind you what is the condition star. Again, this is this condition. So we will tune the scaling r in order to have this condition which holds. So let us compute the maximum of the Kullback-Leibler divergence between fj and fk when they are defined like this. So I remind you that the Kullback-Leibler divergence is just the square norm of fj minus fk divided by twice the square variance. So if I replace fj by this definition, we can take r and move it outside of the norm. So I will have r squared here, and here I have the norm of the difference between x beta j and x beta k divided by 2 sigma p. So now I want to move from this to the norm of beta j to beta k. So for this, what I will use the restricted isometry constant in order to upper bound, so with this quantity, by the upper constant to the square times the maximum of the norm between beta j and beta k. But now, I remind you that beta j and beta k have entries which are either 0 or 1. So difference of the two is either 0 or 1 or minus 1. So actually the square norm is exactly equal to the number of non-zero coefficients in beta j minus beta k. Bon, this is an inequality, but actually this is an equality. And since beta j and beta k have at most d non-zero coefficient, so they have d non-zero coefficient, the difference has at most twice d non-zero coefficient. So the maximum of the Kullback-Leibler divergence between pfj and pfk is upper bounded by this quantity times 2d. So if we want the inequality star to hold, we need to upper bound this quantity by this quantity. Alright, so we want to upper bound this quantity by this quantity. So for which value of r squared does it hold? It will hold if r squared here is smaller than this. Alright? So I need to take r squared smaller than this. But I remind you that at the same time, I want to have the phi j which are as much spread as possible. So if you want them to be as much spread as possible, you need to have the scaling factor r which is as large as possible. So I will take the largest value for which this inequality holds. So we take r squared equal to this. So I have defined now my collection f1, fn, and I have checked that it fulfills this condition star here. So all I need, if I want to use this result, is now to have a lower bound on this minimum distance to the cube. So this is what we do. So if I look at the square distance between fj and fk, again, use the fact that fj is r times x beta j. So I have this equality. And again, I want to move from this norm to the norm over beta j minus beta k. So I will use the lower isometry property constant. This is larger than R2 times this constant to the square times the square norm of beta j minus beta k. And again, this is the same as before. This is equal to the number of coefficient of non-zero coefficient of beta j minus beta k. And how is beta j, beta k? We have not used at all these properties for the moment. Well, it is such that this number of coefficients is at least d. So this will be plugged here in order to say that this is larger than d. So what we obtain here is that this square distance is larger than R2 times d times this constant to the square. So now I will replace R2 by its very definition. I obtain this lower bound here. And finally, so I have not used the second property of the beta j, which was a lower bound on logarithm of n, this lower bound. So if I plug this lower bound, I then get this lower bound here. So now, so the minimum for j different of k is larger than this quantity, right? So if I plug in corollary 3.6, which is here, what I obtain is exactly the claimed result, which is this one. So we have proved this lower bound on the minimax risk on this sparse regression. So let us comment a bit this result. So let me now comment on the lower bound that we have obtained. So what we have obtained today is that if we look at all the possible regression with at most d non-zero coefficient, so beta star is d sparse, then the best estimator has a risk uniformly on this family, which is lower bounded by this quantity here. Right? So we have a constant, we have this ratio of isometry constant to the square times d log p over d sigma. All right? I remind you that what I recalled at the very beginning of the lecture, what we have seen in the last lecture, is that if you take the model selection estimator, for any f star which is d sparse, then you have that the risk of your estimator, so the same quantity here, is upper bounded by a constant times d times log of e times p over d times sigma. So let us compare these two bounds. As you can see, they look quite the same. They both have this d log p over d times sigma 2. But there are some differences, so there are some constants here which are clearly not the same. And there is this constant here which depends on the design. So maybe I must emphasize that this bound is true for any design matrix X. So actually I can take the sup over all the design matrix. Right? While here I have a lower bound which will depend on the design matrix. So I must emphasize that this constant can be very small, right? In particular, for example, if you think about x which has a rank 1, this can be as small as 0, d is 1. But there are some cases where this constant is something like 1/4, something like this. For example, if all the entries of x are IID standard Gaussian, then you have that this will behave essentially as a constant as long as the dimension d is not larger than a constant times n over log p. So, depending on the design, this can behave as a constant or as 1. But if you take the supremum over the design, this behaves like a constant, right? As long as d is not too small, too large, so not larger than n over p. So, if we compare this bound, if you think at this as a constant, you see that they are quite similar. And in this sense, we can say that the model selection estimator is near optimal, so near because it is up to constant, in the minimax sense, in the sense that in the minimax, you cannot have a minimax squeeze, which is much smaller than this. It can be a constant times this smaller, so it's up to a constant, but it cannot be much smaller than this. So this is why we can consider model selection as being almost optimal, and this is thanks to the comparison between these two inequalities. So I think it is good that you practice a bit this kind of lower bound. And for this, so you have another assigned exercise, which is the exercise, which is, as far as I remember, I should check it, it is 383. Okay, so you have to look also at this exercise. So you will group some other lower bounds like this. And that's all for today. So see you next week.